Hello colleagues. This week you'll be creating a video strategy lesson. And this will be a brief video. Sometimes it can be 3 minutes, 5 minutes, sometimes up to 10 minutes. And so the length of the lesson will be up to you. And so for this assignment, you'll be creating that strategy lesson and you'll be using a brief lesson plan. And I will share with you, and I have posted the template for the brief lesson plan. And you'll include some type of visual to support your students or some type of model that you'll be using to demonstrate instruction and to show students exactly what it is you're trying to get them to do, or the steps in the metacognitive process, or an example of the work so that they can engage in the learning much better. And you'll demonstrate the strategy. And typically if you had students in front of you, you would provide a model and show what you would do. You would use some guided practice in thinking about what you would do together with the student to really scaffold their thinking, and then you would watch them as they would do it independently. But for our purposes, for the video, we're really thinking about the I do and how the lesson would sound, since you don't have students to engage with in this part. But you may include sort of your thinking if this was a small group scenario, or this was a whole group lesson. You could include that in your brief lesson plan in thinking about that particular structure. And then also including some type of wrap up, really showing either readers and writers, communicating with them how this will help them as a reader or writer, or sharing some of that information in the end as they go off to work independently. So in creating your lesson plan, this is a lesson plan developed by Mulligan and Landrigan, again from their Assessment in Perspective text. And you can just briefly post some of the standards that you'll be focusing on. Some teachers even will put the standards and then even the focused goal for this particular student. So you'll be using some of the assessment data that you have looked at and analyzed for your case study student. And then after you set your targeted goal, you might post or write your targeted goal at the top, and then really think about, is there a connection for the student? It might be a student that you've worked with in the past. This part of the lesson you may not have right now, but just so in case you want to use this template moving forward in your classroom on your instructional practices, this is typically how it's used. So you would sort of just jot a couple of notes. It's not something lengthy, like what the student in learning they engaged in the previous day or in the past. You might say to them, oh, so remember yesterday when we were thinking about, or last week we really learned about, and then this week we're going to be learning about. And then a lot of times you'll want to think about a pre-assessment question for a student. So if you're thinking about revision, so how do writers revise? You might launch your lesson with that type of thinking, just to focus students around a particular type of question, and then pausing and giving them a moment to really think in their minds on how that might work, or how do readers solve a word that's unknown or that they've never seen before. What would they do? And then they might think about it to themselves or turn and talk to a partner. And you might use this opportunity to really take some anecdotal notes or listen to what the student might share, because that might shift what you're really thinking about and help you to be able to identify, using this little targeted assessment data piece, to how you might angle this lesson moving forward. So in a Tier 1 opportunity, if many of the students are able to tell you more than you anticipated, you might lift the level of this lesson. Or if students had a lot of confusion based on the work that you've done previously, you might use that assessment data to really sort of gear this to lean into the things that they needed additional support or scaffold with. Here you might list the brief text that you're going to use, and then you want to identify the language that you're going to use in your teaching points. So teaching points are something that in your instructional practices you really want to think deeply about, and you really want to be very lean with your language on your teaching point. So today I'm going to teach you, and then whatever it is that you're going to teach them. So that way students are able to tell exactly and be able to determine what they're really thinking about. And if you use this structure consistently, students are better able to identify their learning goals. Students are better able to identify what it is, the work that you focused on today. And so again and again, you want to really make sure that this language is very lean and that we've gone to that teaching point directly and right away. And many times we'll repeat that teaching point again. So today I taught you, right? And so this language in your focus lesson should be very similar. So for our purposes, for our lesson, at the end, we'll want to sort of repeat our teaching point and really be concise, where some of the other parts of the lesson will be in the video, but the part where we would engage with students will obviously not be in our strategy video. So after naming our teaching point, we really want to be sure that we're demonstrating the strategy. So many times, whether our strategy is a skill, we can teach a skill in isolation, even if it's a decoding skill, but we'll always want to connect it to text. We don't want to leave students with just that strategy in isolation. We'll want to be able to connect a text. So even something reviewing sight words, you might have that as an intervention. You'll always want to have students identify the sight word within the text, because that creates the transfer from one learning opportunity to another learning opportunity. So always connecting to text is critically important. So we'll want to really think aloud about the teaching point, how we do the work, really model the steps in the process. So how do we engage in that work? How do we break that down? We know from our Sarah Vallow text that she identifies those metacognitive steps for us and really breaks the work down for students so that they can engage in that in a step-by-step process. Some people will include that in their visual, depending on where students are at in that strategy work, right? So they need to break down the steps in order, or are they beyond that where they're just focusing on one section of the learning? And then really talking to them about how this will help you as a reader or a writer moving forward so that the skill becomes transferable. So many times in our reading instruction, we have texts that we ask students questions about, right? So who are the characters, right? And so sometimes that work can seem limiting to students and that learning stays just within that text. We want to be very broad. So even though we might be talking about some literary elements or identifying characters' feelings in one text, we'll want to say to them, so today and every day, when we think about a book, it's important for us to think about characters and how they're feeling so we can really understand how they will make connections with the problem or solve a problem. So this part of your lesson, as you're modeling that, you really want to be clear on how that learning today or how what you modeled will help them every day as a reader and a writer. So this part of the lesson is when you might engage in something with a student, and then you're going to watch and collect assessment formative data, take anecdotal notes while they're working independently. And then again, depending on if it's tier 1 or small group or one-on-one, you really want to summarize that learning in the end. And so for our purposes, you'll just sort of repeat the teaching point and send your reader or writer off to do this work or what they need to think about during the lesson. So this part of your lesson won't be visual in the video, but it's something that you'll want to think about moving forward, because even in a small group, this same lesson structure, this research-based structure, will really help your students in moving forward in their literacy development. So for our purposes, you'll want to just briefly, you can even hand write this and attach it to your lesson. Or some people in the past have sort of talked through this lesson plan and then created the video so that there was an opportunity to sort of talk through some of the assessment data and why you chose this. So this anchor lesson for our purposes really connects back to the case study. So some people will talk through this video during the beginning of their video they'll be posting, and then post the video of the actual teaching, and then you'll be posting this to the discussion board and then responding to two of your colleagues. If you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me.